Hong Kong is a country, city? Autonomous part of China? Okay. Hong Kong is an autonomous part of People's Republic of China. And even though its role in the modern era is very significant, this small area of 2,755 square kilometers, inhabited by almost 7.5 million people, wasn't always so big, populous, and significant. To understand what exactly I meant by that, we have to look at the history of the area we call Hong Kong. Before I start, I would like to say that the area of Hong Kong and the island of Hong Kong refer to two different things. One refers to just the island, the other to the whole of today's Hong Kong. So in the video, unless I specify by saying island, when I mention Hong Kong, I mean the whole area of today's Hong Kong, okay? Sources about history of today's Hong Kong region prior to British colonization differ between the European and Asian. European sources, which are primarily British, state the history of Hong Kong as a barren rock prior to 1840s British colonization. In contrast, the Asian sources, primarily Chinese, state that the area has been inhabited for thousands of years and played a vital role in the history and development of today's Guangdong County. Now, considering that almost 6,000-year-old archaeological remains of human settlements have been found in Hong Kong, it is most likely that the Chinese sources are far more reliable when looking at the history of the region prior to the 19th century. From these sources, we know that South China, along with Hong Kong, was settled by 100 Yue tribes, more closely related to Malays, Vietnamese, and Polynesians than Han Chinese. The region was largely undeveloped, with farmers and fishermen living here and there with very low overall centralization, but it is still most likely that these people did set up some kind of a political entity in the area. However, we know very little of their activity before the arrival of the Qin dynasty. The Qin took control of the land and brought with them the Han Chinese aristocrats with their fancy bureaucracy to rule over the peasantry, and this finally created some much needed centralization. It was also the Qin dynasty that set the precedent for Han Chinese migration into today's South China, which will continue to increase over the upcoming years. When the Qin dynasty fell, Hong Kong became part of a southern Yue kingdom, which was still ruled by the Han aristocracy despite majority of the population being of Yue culture. Later, the southern Yue kingdom was incorporated into the Han Empire by Emperor Wu of Han. It was under this dynasty that Lei Chek Uk Han Tomb was constructed on Kowloon Peninsula, which was discovered in 1955. The tomb was constructed in Han Chinese style, however it is unknown for whom, as there were no bodies found. Also during the Han dynasty, small-scale pearl farming started to emerge in Tai Poi Oi. When the Han dynasty fell, the Hong Kong region switched a lot between different political entities. First the Eastern Wu, then the Jin, Liu Song, Southern Qi, Liang, Cheng, Sui, and finally some stability came under the highly regarded Tang dynasty. Now during these quick political changes, not just in Hong Kong region, but in whole of China, many more Han Chinese migrated to the south of today's China. This was partly due to the instability and warfare, but also partly due to many new economic opportunities in the largely undeveloped south compared to the north. This brought new development to the Hong Kong region, and small-scale industries like aforementioned pearl farming and also possibly salt mining started to increase. After the Tang dynasty collapsed, the area fell under the control of the Southern Han dynasty and then Southern Song dynasty. It was under these two dynasties that Hong Kong continued to develop mainly on Kowloon Peninsula. This can be seen in the fact that during the fall of the Southern Song dynasty under the hands of the Mongols, Kowloon was regularly cited as the refuge of the emperor. This prompted the area to be filled with Song loyalists even when Mongol Yuan dynasty was established, and that is why through much of the Yuan rule the region's economy stagnated as it was inhabited mainly by only farmers, fishermen, and pirates. Between the cusp of the Yuan dynasty falling and the Ming dynasty being established, the Hong Kong area became under the control of 7 large and wealthy families who owned most of the land. It was under these families' supervision that throughout the Ming dynasty, many settlers from Guangdong and Fujian, the two prominent coastal provinces of southern China, migrated to Kowloon Peninsula. Some of these people also settled across the harbor on Hong Kong Island, however the island remained largely uninhabited with just few small fishing towns. It was when the Ming dynasty got replaced by the Qing dynasty in 1644 that the Hong Kong area, along with the island of Hong Kong, became much more incorporated into the empire. Fishing boats from other parts of China started to use the local harbor, and close registrars started to be kept on vessels entering and leaving the harbor. Collection of taxes became more efficient, and village elders represented the area and local government. But even with all of this, the area was still controlled largely by pirates dating back to the days of the Yuan dynasty, some of which were the largest names of Chinese pirate history, like Cheng First, founder of the Pirate Confederation, and his wife/daughter-in-law? But it was cool because his son was adopted and he was dead anyways. After the pirates were driven out in 1809 and before the British arrival, the area became a small but strategically important harbor and a military outpost for the Qing dynasty. Most of the people that lived there were living a simple farmer's life like anywhere else in China, and small village temples were scattered all around the hilly area. It is almost certain now that Hong Kong had a history before the British arrival, but how and why did the British come to Hong Kong in the first place? Well, as with all things British, it involved tea and a bigger army diplomacy. You see, British were obsessed with tea to such an extent that it comprised 10% of the entire British government's revenue, and China, having seemingly endless supply of tea, was the market to be in. However, trading valuable metals or expensive manufactured goods for something that can be grown endlessly ends up being not good for business. For the British at least. So to solve this problem, they started trading cheaply made drug for another cheaply made drug. The problem was that the British had such a high demand for tea that the amount of opium they were importing into China was staggering. It created such an opium problem in the country that the emperor couldn't ignore it anymore, and so the First Opium War started. Before the war, most of the British activity and trade went through Canton, which is located up the stream from Hong Kong, but that will start to change. During the war, preliminary peace talks that later broke down gave the island of Hong Kong to the British. Despite the fact that the talks broke down, the British still decided to take the island anyways, and on 25th of January 1841, British occupied the island of Hong Kong for the first time. When the war finally ended, Britain officially gained control over the island in perpetuity, and Hong Kong became a crown colony operating under British law. The British quickly started to use Hong Kong as a trading port with China, and since they controlled it, they dictated the terms of the trade within its borders. Hong Kong quickly proved to be a very valuable port, as its location had a perfect deep harbor which was protected from typhoons and was easy to access both from the sea and from mainland China. Now firmly under British control, Hong Kong started to undergo drastic changes, with large building projects springing up all around the island and huge trade deals being hammered out every day within its borders. And despite what some would have you believe, it wasn't just the British who got rich off of these endeavors. The Chinese populace, which formed the majority of the population on the island, enjoyed much higher standards of living than in the surrounding Chinese regions, and it was mostly local Chinese people that held control over the local trade companies established by the British. However, all wasn't perfect. The sudden change brought upon the area caused huge influx of European adventurers and mainland Chinese pouring into the island. This caused a sudden spike in theft, piracy, and disease throughout Hong Kong, and to add to all of this, Chinese officials along with the British on occasion used their lack of knowledge of the local jurisdiction to exact ridiculous laws or taxes on unsuspected citizens on both sides. Despite these struggles, Hong Kong kept moving on. Christian missions were established and the economy kept growing, but the British felt like their new valuable port didn't have much protection from China and was vulnerable to attack. So during the Second Opium War in 1860, they pushed for a perpetual lease of Kowloon Peninsula to serve as a buffer between the island and China. This buffer quickly became just as valuable as Hong Kong Island itself, and construction projects on Kowloon began almost instantly. By 1890s, Hong Kong population was 221,000, which compared to just 7,500 50 years ago is almost a 30 times increase. This increase brought upon the British-led racial/social status laws against the majority of the Chinese population, i.e. the official language was only English, Chinese residents had to carry a lamp when crossing at night, and disease outbreaks led to racial zoning, most notably at Victoria Peak. However, Hong Kong still managed to reach many milestones. First, electrical and gas companies emerged, rickshaws started to make way to more European style of transportation, first hospital of Hong Kong was established along with the first Western style college, etc. All of these changes increased the value of Hong Kong for the British, but the increased value also sparked the British fear of losing it to some foreign power yet again, and so they struck another deal with China during the Second Convention of Beijing to acquire even more land. This time not in perpetuity, but for 99 years. By 1898, Hong Kong was finally the size it is now. Well, mostly. At the turn of the century, it became obvious that even though Hong Kong was under the British jurisdiction, its ups and downs were very much dictated by the economic and political status of neighboring China. And as the Qing dynasty was very much struggling to keep afloat, the boom of Hong Kong started to slow down. Nonetheless, the University of Hong Kong was founded in 1911 as a highly regarded institution, which it continues to be to this day. And that same year, the Chinese Revolution brought down the last dynasty and created the Republic of China. However, this entire entity was very unstable. In many many warlords held most of the power in various areas of China. Such instability on the mainland brought even more Chinese immigrants into Hong Kong, who now worked in the many newly built factories in the colony. This cheap labor proved valuable to the British during the Great War, as Hong Kong played an important part in supplying Britain with manufactured goods. After the war, the sizable immigration still continued, and this started to cause large problems for the British, as Hong Kong interwar period was dictated by many riots, strikes, and boycotts. Prior to the Hong Kong's involvement in World War II, the population of Hong Kong swelled up to well over 1.5 million people, most of whom were fleeing the Japanese Empire. 8th of December 1941, the same morning of Pearl Harbor attack, Hong Kong was invaded by the Japanese forces. Under the Japanese occupation, inflation was rampant, thousands of civilians were killed, raped, starving, and/or deported out of Hong Kong, and all of this resulted in the population loss of 1 million people by the end of the war. When the Japanese finally surrendered, Hong Kong was restored back to the British hand. However, a new problem started to emerge: the Chinese Communist Revolution in 1949. Due to this, Hong Kong yet again experienced a large influx of immigration, but in this case it proved to be very valuable as it replenished the labor pool lost during World War II. This replenished labor pool was now being backed up by a large inflow of Chinese firms relocating to Hong Kong, also due to the Communist Revolution. The manufacturing industry started to increase yet again, and the words "made in Hong Kong" started to be synonymous with quality rather than cheap, low-grade production. But this economic boom started to hit a bump in the road due to its focus on manufacturing, which now more stable and modernized PRC was much better at. Hong Kong had to pivot, and pivot it did. As a capitalistic system in a communist world which now opened its markets, Hong Kong managed to become one of the most valuable financial and transshipment ports in the world. It also finally became less colonially, and many laws for equal rights and pay, including for women, were passed throughout the later half of the 20th century. But the new problem on the horizon was the lease time of 99 years was closing in, and the PRC was more than eager to regain control of such a valuable area. However, if you follow it closely, only the 1898 Treaty for New Territories was signed for 99 years, which didn't include Kowloon and/or Hong Kong Island. Nevertheless, the way the British acquired these holdings wasn't very peaceful. The UN doesn't favor colonism, splitting the new colonies from the rest would result in huge problems, and the PRC, well, insisted on getting whole of Hong Kong back. This resulted in Hong Kong becoming part of the PRC under the one country, two systems rule in 1997, which means that Hong Kong is left alone to a certain extent to maintain its politics and economy at least until 2040s. This deal, depending on who you ask, is either great or not so great. Despite all of that, Hong Kong today holds the highest financial development index, it's the world's 7th largest trading entity, has the most skyscrapers in the world, has the world's highest life expectancy, has one of the highest per capita income, etc. Hong Kong right now is strong, modern, and resilient. However, its future seems foggy. The name of Hong Kong came from either a phonetic rendering of the spoken Cantonese in the area, which looked like this, and/or can be traced to the Tanka people who used the Hong Kong island for mostly fishing. The meaning of the name is something like fragrant harbor or incense harbor. Fragrant due to the inflow of new water through the Pearl River, and/or incense due to the incense production in Kowloon, which could be smelt on Hong Kong island. Regardless of the origin, the word used to be spelled together like this, however that was changed in 1926, and from that we have today's Hong Kong. If you enjoyed the video, please share, subscribe, and/or consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you. Until next time, my name is MLaser.